My guest, Ken Nwadike Jr., missed qualifying for the Boston Marathon by just 11 seconds twice. But what seemed like a defeat turned into his greatest blessing. After the Boston Marathon bombing in 2013, Ken decided to show up anyway, not as a runner, but as someone offering free hugs to runners along the course. And that simple act of kindness went viral and led Ken to create the Free Hugs Project, bringing compassion to protests and difficult situations across America.
As the oldest boy, especially the oldest boy in a Nigerian family, my mom had to be hard on me because I set the example for my younger siblings. And so she's like, if I mess up with the oldest one, then you've lost all of them. So she was always like really hard on me, didn't really care to be my friend. She's like, I'm your mom, not your friend. And so, like, all of the discipline and things that I felt where she was just whipping me into shape my whole life. And I remember back then, even whenever I would get a little bit of money and she would ask me for it or take it from me to go and do other things with. And I used to tell her, Mom, if you're poor and I'm poor and I'm trying to figure out how to multiply this money, if you keep taking it from me to spread across for grocery or to do things for the other kids, we're never going to get anywhere. And she's like, boy, be quiet and give me your money. Right. And so when it finally got to the point where the Hollywood Half Marathon was like this big thing. And so I had booked out all of these rooms at the W Hotel on Hollywood Boulevard, where I had like my celebrity guests that were staying. And then I had my mom in this really nice suite. And so I went up to her room right before the race was going to start, because it starts super early in the morning, roughly about 6 a.m., because we didn't want it to get too warm. And so we're out on her balcony and I said, hey, Mom, I'm going to call into my guys that I have manning the starting line of the race. But I want you to stay out here on the balcony with me. And in a couple of minutes, you're going to see what's going to happen. And so we're just standing there talking on the balcony of her room at the W Hotel as all of a sudden 10,000 people fill up the streets and go running by. And she starts crying and she looks at me and she's like, I just can't believe that my little boy that I spent so much time like trying to just make sure he stayed on the straight and narrow path, that you did this. Like, you have all of these people here because of an idea in your head, and to be using this as an opportunity to go back to those shelters that took care of us to say thank you. And she's like, there's no greater joy that I have. And coming from a mother who like was very, very hard on me growing up, that was like our first like real magical moment of, I'm proud of you. My mom had never seen me race in my entire track career. Still till today, my mom's never seen me race. She's never been to one single track meet, a cross country meet, none of that. One day, actually, she had come out onto the track as I was finishing like my last few steps of a mile race that I had won. And so she missed it. And I don't fault her for that. She was a single mother trying to raise 5 kids through homelessness. Extracurricular activities were not her focus, especially as an African mother. Like, she's like, focus on your studies, all this running around, what's that supposed to do? But she saw the effects of that when she was standing on that balcony in Hollywood. And she was just like, she was so overwhelmed with joy in seeing that. And, it's a sight to see when 10,000 people go running by, and to know that the only reason why they're running by is because of an idea from your son's mind. I can only imagine what that felt like to her.
Well, that's what's interesting, because I feel like that is such a huge accomplishment. You could have easily just rested on your laurels and just, either continue to do that or just gone back to your, transportation company.
Yeah.
But then the Boston Marathon bombing happened.
Exactly. Yeah. It happened the same year that was our first year Hollywood Half Marathon. And so we were in 2013 was our race, and our race just happens to take place the first Sunday in April every year. And so that next day, Monday morning, is Patriots Day. And so as we're having our debrief meeting, and we're talking about ways to improve on the Hollywood Half Marathon, we're like, next year we should do this and do that. We got to become like them, because they were so big and like everybody knows of the Boston Marathon. And then boom, you see that breaking news headline that bombs had gone off at the finish line. And I just remember feeling like, man, who would bomb runners? Like my whole life, all of the runners that I have met have been some of the most kind, genuine, and supportive people that I've met in my life, from the coach to my teammates. When I went to college, same thing. Coach Scott, my teammates there, they were all still my friends today. There were people who were looking out for me. When I was with Nike, Coach Frank Gagliano, my teammates there while we were up at Stanford. And it was just like, man, everybody along the way of my life, all of my favorite people were runners. And so I was like, any runners that are there, they have to be those same sort of people. And no one deserves to be attacked in such a way, to be doing your sport, crossing the finish line, and a bomb goes off. And even for the spectators that were there cheering for their families. And so I was just like, no, man, I have to do something about this. Because I felt like I owe the sport back, right? Like this sport took me out of homelessness. It got me to college. It gave me purpose. The only reason why I'm even able to talk to you right now, to have this conversation with you right now, literally, is the confidence that I picked up through being a track athlete, right? And so I have always felt like I owe the sport big time, because if it wasn't for running, I was sure I was probably going to go to the Air Force. Like I was already studying my ASVAB. That was my fallback plan, was if I didn't get a scholarship to college, I was going to join the Air Force. And running changed that path for me. But more than that, it gave me confidence and a personality to be able to create other entrepreneurial ventures. And so I was like, I have to do something. And that something initially I thought was going to be run in the race, but not just run it, but invite and encourage tens of thousands of other people to join me there, right? Because I had just come off of 10,000 people just ran Hollywood with me. Hey, you guys, let's go and make the next Boston the biggest Boston ever. And so they were like, word, okay. And so everyone starts registering to do it, and they're pledging on this site that I had made. Actually, the page that I had created back then, it was actually called Free Hugs for Runners. Like that was the name of the whole brand. It was like a Facebook page, a website. It was called Free Hugs for Runners. And we're going to be a crew, and we're going to go and run the Boston Marathon, tens of thousands of us, to say that we're not intimidated by these acts of terror. And if you were to go to like even the Free Hugs Project Facebook page right now, I think you could sort back to the history of what the page used to be called. And it was Free Hugs for Runners.
Where did that name come from?
What, Free Hugs?
Free Hugs for Runners.
Yeah. Oh, well, because I felt like because of this bombing that took place, I was like, we have to figure out a way to like show love to the running community, because they were hurting. And so I was like, Free Hugs for Runners is like a healing way to kind of, how do we combat this terror attack that happened there? And so we were.
But I mean, were you in the shower? Like, did it just occur to you? You knew right away, this is it. Free Hugs for Runners. This is what I'm supposed to call it.
Yeah, it was just, maybe it was in the shower. I don't know, because ideas do come to me in the shower and in the plane for sure. I feel like when I have to I can't do anything else, then my ideas start spinning. And so it was probably one of those places. But I was like, Free Hugs for Runners just makes sense. We're going to go out there and run, but we're going to be like ambassadors of love when we go out and run this race. But most importantly, we're going to show that we're not scared of your acts of terror, that we're going to come back in bigger numbers. And so, because at that time, there was the whole Boston Strong movement that formed immediately in response. And so I was like, how do you set yourself apart from this huge movement of Boston Strong? Boston Strong was almost as bold a statement as those Live Strong bracelets in the 90s, right? Like Boston Strong came out and everyone knew of those colors, the blue and the gold, right after the bombing. And so I was like, I want to associate myself with that, but I kind of want to carve my own lane. And so my own lane was Free Hugs for Runners. And we were going to get tens of thousands of runners that were going to show up at the Boston Marathon, and we're going to run it, and we're going to be like emotional support for other people that are there. And I was the one who missed qualifying by a few seconds. Like, you have to pick which race you're going to use to get into Boston to run as a qualifier. And at the time, being under age 35, it's the fastest qualifying time to get in. It was 3 hours and 5 minutes. And so you had to run 3 hours and 5 minutes flat. And I ran in the qualifier race, and I ended up running 3 hours, 5 minutes, like 0.11 seconds. And so because of that, like it comes so close. And can you imagine training for something for an entire year and running in this race for 3 hours, feeling good and checking your watch and like, I'm right on pace, I'm right on pace. And in that year and 3 hours wasted from just 11 extra seconds, like 11 seconds, I could like 11, that's nothing. I could go down these stairs right here and come up in 11 seconds. That's
what happened? Nothing. Did you lose track of time, or did you think your clock slow, or what happened?
Two things I think happened. One, I cut it too close. But two, whether people believe it was God or the universe or whatever it is that people want to say it was meant to have been missed, because in missing it led to what the next idea was, which was free hugs for runners needed to mean fly out there and literally hug people. Right. And that gave birth to that idea, as I had to go back and tell my wife, like, look, I already bought tickets to Boston because I thought I was going to run in the race. So I'm going there anyway, and I'm going to cheer on all of these runners who took my pledge as the whole free hugs for runners movement was growing. And I was like, I'm going to go out there and just hug on as many people as I can. And
you ran twice, right? You tried to qualify twice within a week. Within a week.
Yeah, correct. So I first ran one seaside here in the Los Angeles area. So it was like a coastal race. It was mostly flat ground. And I was feeling good that whole way and missed it there by like 11 seconds. And so then my idea was, and I ran that one on a Sunday. So by that Saturday, so literally the same week, it was in 1 week, I was like, then I have to run it again. And anyone who knows, if you've ever run a marathon, you don't run 2 marathons in 1 week. Like you're still getting feeling back in your legs, right? And even worse, I said, well, I'm a better downhill runner than a flat runner. And so I said, I'm going to fly out to Utah, where I knew all of their marathons come downhill. And so there was this race called the Big Cottonwood Marathon. And I was like, I'm going to run this one because it's going to force me downhill for the entire way of the marathon. And so I ran it, and same thing, coming down the hill. And I think this time it was like 3:05, like 0.9 or something like that. It's like, what? Twice? Like, and you came that close again. I almost wondered if I would have just skipped the LA one and went straight to Utah, would I have like blasted past that 3:05? And that's why I still think it was all fate. It was meant to be. I was not supposed to run in the Boston Marathon. I tried it twice as an elite runner, as being in the top shape of my life. And I couldn't hold this pace for even just a few extra seconds to help me reach that goal. And in all of my running career, I had never shed tears at the finish line of a race until after that Big Cottonwood race in Utah, because that feeling of defeat from like muscle aches and pain, but then also emotionally of saying, man, I was really doing this to be there with the people of Boston, and I let them down. Like, I'm not going to be a part of this whole thing. And I've promoted it to everyone. Free Hugs for Runners was going on with or without me. Everyone was already like, people who had the slower qualifying times or who were faster than me because they were marathoners, they were all going. I'm not a marathoner. I run 1 mile really fast. I don't run 26.2 miles. And so there was a bunch of people that were going who took that pledge of Free Hugs for Runners, but I was like, I'm not going to be able to make it. And so they went, and I was like, well, I guess I'm just going to put Free Hugs on a t-shirt and go out there anyway. And then that's what gave birth to the whole movement of what later became the Free Hugs Project. And I didn't know that at the time, but until I stood out there on the race course and I was just hugging people as they were coming by, because I wasn't even sure that people would take me up on that offer, right? Like, you're a Black dude standing in Boston. Who's going to give you a hug in Boston on a race course? And so I was like, well, I'll see what happens, and if I don't get any hugs, it's all good. I gave it a try. But I had Free Hugs on a t-shirt. I held a Free Hugs sign. And of course, the elite runners ran past me because they're racing for prize money. They're racing to win. But right after the elites went by, it took that one first person to break the ice and come and give me a hug. And strangely, back then, who was it? It was Doug Flutie, who was the former San Diego Chargers quarterback, which is crazy because I live here in San Diego. And so it was so strange that out of 50,000 people that were running that race, this first dude that comes in and he's got like the American flag on his shorts, and he kind of puts his arms in like an airplane motion and comes over to me and then gives me that hug, like flew into me and gives me that hug. And that was literally the first hug that I got in Boston. He had no clue who I am, doesn't know that I'm from San Diego, but it was our former San Diego Chargers quarterback. And then he continues running on. But once he set that example, it broke the ice, and thousands of people behind him started coming in and taking the hug. And just like back here, I had my camera with the tripod. I had my camera with the tripod set up right behind me as everyone was running by, because I wanted to document the experience. And so I took that video, uploaded it to YouTube and Facebook. Instant viral hit by the time I had made it back to my transfer from LAX back to San Diego. And I was just like, what just happened? And then it seemed like every news site in the country was either sharing the video of this feel-good moment that happened at the Boston Marathon. I think it first started with BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed like snipped up what do you call it? Not JPEGs, but like animated GIFs of snippets of everything that was happening there. And they're like, and in this hug where this person jumped into his arms, and this hug where this person was wearing a tutu. And it was just this really feel-good thing. And then they shared the link to the video. So the video just went nuts. And then it went from BuzzFeed to Huffington Post, New York Times, Boston Globe, started getting invited out to do TV shows, from Good Morning America to flew out to London to do Good Morning Britain. All of these websites talking about what inspired you to do this thing after this bombing took place. Like, why was free hugs your response? And so that led to that conversation.
Hey, really quickly, if you like this content or if you don't like it, let me know down in the comments, because your likes and comments are going to help me learn what you want more of. And then that way I can keep bringing you the good stuff. All right. Thanks so much for your feedback, and back to the show.
What did you experience that was unexpected from that first hugging event?
Absolutely. I felt like I wished that the world could be like that all the time, because after so many people coming in and sharing those hugs with me, it's like in those moments you forget that you were the homeless kid who struggled with your own insecurities. And now all of a sudden everybody sees you. And when I got back to the shelter with these kids that I was mentoring, and I'm talking with them about the experience as well, and they were saying the same thing, like, Ken, you have to keep this up. People can see us now. And I knew how much it meant to feel invisible, as did they. And where now all of a sudden their mentor, their peer mentor, is like on all these social media news sites. And so by the time I had landed and turned on my phone, and I'm like, what is going on? This thing was a viral hit. And just being a part of that experience, I had never had any sort of viral fame or viral success before. So I didn't know what that entails. And then shortly after, when you're being called by all of these news sites to do an interview, it felt good, but it only felt good for a little bit, because it went from, man, this is awesome, to, wait, is the only reason why this is gaining all of this attention, is it because people aren't like that anymore towards one another? They're not sharing these moments of positive human interaction. They're not sharing these random acts of kindness. We're seeing each other as we pass on the sidewalks, and we're looking down at our phones, right? And that always reminded me of when I was the kid in the hallway looking down at the ground because I didn't want to make eye contact with people. And I'm like, now everybody's doing the same thing, but they're looking at their phones like that. And I was like, man, this is terrible what we've become. We didn't have those phones back then. We weren't attached to our phones back then. And now, even when I'm on college campuses, all the kids have headphones in their ears and they're looking down at their phone. I'm like, man, you just missed, maybe your potential spouse could have just walked by and you're so like connected to your phone. And so that started to make me sad. It made me realize, man, it makes it easy to attack each other. It makes it easy to be mean to one another, to be less civil towards one another, the further that we get away from real human interaction. It's like if everything becomes virtual and we're not hugging each other, we're not high-fiving each other and forming these real friendships, well, we don't really know how to act when we're around people. And so that came to life for me at that time, which really started to shift my work to where I knew that I didn't want to just do this in the feel-good places anymore. I needed to start going out where people were hurting, where people were being attacked, and there was a lot of violence. And that's what led to being out on the front lines, because I was so like torn by the Trayvon Martin shooting by George Zimmerman. And I don't often share this with people. I put out a video back then because it was really starting to hurt me as I watched on Facebook some of these same people who were running in my races, or they were signing up for free hugs for runners. I would see the evil things that they would write about Trayvon Martin, saying that like he deserved it or whatever. And that was really hurting me to my core, because to me, I looked like Trayvon Martin. I was that same kid who, and Skittles really are my favorite candy. I would have been the same kid walking down to the corner store to go and get some Skittles, and easily could have been stalked by this man the same way. And so when I was reading what people were saying about him, it was like really breaking my heart. And so I had made a video back then, and I talked about how, for all of you guys that are following my work right now and running in my races, but you're saying these really evil things about Trayvon Martin, know that I was that same kid. And you're signing up and you're coming to my races and showing me all the support and love. But if Trayvon Martin would have been given enough time to get to my age, he probably could have done the same thing. But we'll never know that, because his life was cut short, and a lot of people, like, that video really resonated with them, because I was like, if you're not giving Black boys enough time to mature into men, then you're judging them at a period of their life where we all could have made mistakes. We all were hotheads. If you're following me, I might fight you. I was that same kid. Who would have known I'd grow up to be a father of 5 and trying to be a change maker and doing all of these things that like just feel right to me. But I was the same knucklehead kid back then. My brothers and I, if we had to take care of business, we would take care of business. And so to see people speaking of him in that way, I was like, but you're judging a boy. How many of you guys have little boys that would have done a very similar thing? And so when I put that video out, that was the beginning of me starting to move more towards conscious work like that, like being out on the front lines, but not only being on the front lines, but being more aware of the way that people judge people, especially people of color. I'm like, they don't understand us or where we come from. And it's so easy to, I always used to say back then, like, they'll take our dads away from us and then laugh at us for not having dads. And that always like was so true of a statement to me, because my dad got removed from the house. But then there's like this running joke of like, Black kids don't have father figures or don't have their dad. And I'm like, because the incarceration rates of how easy you guys make it to go and lock up our fathers makes it so easy. And then you turn around and then you laugh at us and judge us for not having fathers, when really the system is set up in a way to take our fathers from us. And so when I started to understand those things, I was like, I've got to change that. One, I've got to be a better role model and example of what a Black father looks like. Two, I have to make sure that people understand in a way that is easily digestible to them. I wanted them to understand the struggles of just being a Black man in America in a way that like isn't confrontational, to where they're like, oh yeah, always complaining or whatever. I just wanted them to understand in a really simple way. And so because of that, it's like most of my audience of the Free Hugs Project and the work that I do, like the Black and Blue podcast, I was just laughing with the sheriff recently, because I asked him, I said, if you were to look in your stats on Facebook or on your social media, what's the majority of people that are following you? He said, middle-aged white women. I said, mine too. He said, how is that possible? And I said, because it's like, I'm trying to create allies. I'm trying to create accomplices to the fight, to the struggle. Because if it's always people who look like me that are complaining about the things that are going on in our lives, then that's all it will be treated as, oh, the Black people are just complaining again, right? But if you put it in other people's face and you say, hey, here's what we're being faced with in this country. Here's the injustice that we see regularly. I was like, if you can help other people understand that, people from other cultural groups, backgrounds, different races and ethnicities, if they can see that, then that's how you form more allies, and that's how you move more towards peace and understanding. But if it's just an echo chamber, if I'm just like, yo, Light, man, I got pulled over by this cop and this happened, blah, 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 like you'd be like, of course, all of us, right? We all deal with that. But when you're saying that to your white ally friend, male or female, like, hey, I got pulled over and this happened and that happened. And they're like, my experience has never been anything like that when I got pulled over. And it's like, well, that's the problem, right? How do we work towards changing those things? And so when I understood that, that's when I started putting more focus into that sort of work, because I was like, I could be a change maker in my own way. The Black community might not fully understand the reason why I do things the way that I do, but there's a community that I speak to who it's important for them to understand what our experiences are. And so that became like the shift of the work to being more on the front lines.
Yeah, and then also just kind of going back to the party bus experience, like that was the breadcrumb of you working with police officers, learning what their priorities are and what, you know, how to speak their language. And then on your Hollywood Boulevard 5Ks, same thing, you know, you're dealing with 50, 75 cops.
Yep.
So then by the time you decide to go to North Carolina to participate in this crazy, chaotic, you know,
Riot,
protest
yeah,
slash
out on
riot,
the front line. Yep.
you had a very interesting interaction
Yeah.
with a cop.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you say that, because you know, sometimes I don't even think of it like that. That yes, my early days of understanding crowd control in dealing with law enforcement, when I'm dumping off sometimes 1,000 people on a Saturday night, you know, you're loading up all of these buses with people and then going back and picking up people for prom. And it's like, man, on one Saturday, we might move 1,000 people. And so, of course, when you get to those places, there's police standing outside the doors of nightclubs. And like, I'm like, hey, everybody stay cool, hop in line there. And so, and then I would talk with the officers, talk with the bouncers. And so, yeah, you're right. I had those early interactions with law enforcement. And then, of course, with the Hollywood Half Marathon, all of the police that I would sit in meetings with for like the planning of the event. So I went from growing up disliking police to understanding that if we work together, there's a lot that we could accomplish. And so I took that same mindset of being out on the front lines of, look, we can work together and actually solve something and not have to attack one another. And so that's why one of my more viral, or the most viral front lines moment that I've ever had, was in Charlotte in 2016, as people were starting to loot from stores. It reminded me of the LA riots all over again. And the first thing I thought was spring into action, talk to the protesters and try to get them to stand down and not destroy their own community. And then from there, as I'm walking and talking with the protesters, that was when this large white officer looked at my shirt and he said, hey, man, do I get one of those hugs? And, you know, you pause in a moment like that because it's literally gunshots going off. There's tear gas in the air. People are choking. There's these flashbang devices. Everyone is running in different directions because some people were there just to destroy things. Some people were there with valid reasons for protest, and some were just knuckleheads. They're setting fires, they're breaking fights or breaking into fights. And so here I was as this officer asked this, and I saw it just as a moment of extending that olive branch of, can we bridge the gap and create some peace between this white officer in Charlotte, North Carolina, and this Black peace activist who ultimately just wants peace and to really get people together to talk about the issues rather than attacking one another. And so I hugged him. And prior to hugging him, I had already assumed that all of these protesters who I was talking with earlier who understood why I was there. Some of them they were watching some of my former videos and they were bugging out that I was there. Like, yo, it's the free hugs guy, man. I can't believe you came out here. I'm having conversations with them. And literally just because of hugging this officer, it was like, boom, the crowd turned on me, and I always talk about how, you go into fight or flight mode and I'm still really fast. I could have just run away and it would have been over, right? Like no one there would have caught me. That's for sure. But I was like, this is your moment. When I was a boy in the LA riots in 92 and everyone's running in and out of the shelter with all these things that they looted from the stores. And I wanted to be a part of it. And instead, my mother put emphasis and focus on what would Dr. King do. Then that same mentality like came into my head right there on the front lines. What would Dr. King do?
Thank you so much for watching. Just FYI, we post a new video almost every day, so make sure you comment and subscribe below so you don't miss out on anything. And if you enjoyed this video, I think you're really going to love this one as well. And if you ever want to see a playlist of all of my podcasts or all of the plot twists or any other category of videos, you can find links to those in the description below.